When I was 19, I was a venture scout, kind of like Boy Scouts, but co-ed and for older teens. I signed up for a week-long mountain trek with a crew I didn't really know. My friend bailed a few days before we left, so I went alone. That didn't bother me. I've always been able to handle myself. When I arrived, I realized I was the only venture scout and the only girl. It was a little awkward at first, but most of the guys were fine, polite, curious, trying to treat me like one of them. Then there was one kid, Ethan. From the first afternoon, he couldn't stop staring. Not shy glances, fixed, unblinking. I brushed it off as social weirdness and tried not to feed it with attention. The next morning, we split into pairs for a long day hike. I ended up paired with Ethan. He looked way too excited about that. He was smaller than me, spindly, unkempt hair, a little shorter than my 5'7". I figured if he tried anything, I could handle it. So I didn't make a scene. Before we set out, he kept asking if I needed help with sunscreen. I said no. He asked again. I said no. He reached toward my shoulder anyway until another scout snapped. "Dude, cut out." Ethan laughed like it was a joke. On the trail, the questions started. "How old are you?" 19, don't lie, he said, smiling too wide. "You look 14, so innocent." He asked where I lived, if I had siblings, what my favorite color was. Harmless enough, until it wasn't. "Have you heard BDSM?" I pretended not to know what he meant. He launched into an explanation anyway. Way too graphic, way too personal. I kept my eyes on the path, arms tight to my pack straps, body language screaming no, while my face tried to stay neutral. He drifted even closer. "You have beautiful pale skin," he said softly. "You can see rope marks and bruises better." A chill went through me. He asked if I was a virgin. Then he asked if I fantasized about things I won't repeat. I sped up, heart pounding, trying not to run. He matched my pace, smiling a childlike, empty smile. Up ahead, I spotted another pair of scouts. I jogged to catch them. "We should go as a 4, I said too quickly. They hesitated. Rules said pairs only. But one glance at my face and they agreed. Ethan hung back, glaring, then fell in with us. At the summit, those two quietly offered to switch partners for the descent. Ethan looked betrayed, then angry. I didn't care. I took the swap and hiked down with someone else. My new partner asked if Ethan had been bothering me. "I'm fine, Elid." I was 19. I refused to be the girl who couldn't handle it. That night, I had my own tent. Everyone else shared 2 or 3 to a shelter, but since I was the only girl, the leaders put me alone, and they pitched my tent further away so the boys wouldn't bother me. I wished I was closer to the group, not farther. The forest felt bigger out there, louder. Sometime after midnight, I heard rustling. I told myself it was deer. I drifted, then the zipper moved. Slow, careful. I opened one eye in a narrow slit of my sleeping bag. A pale shape filled the gap in the tent door. An eye, Ethan's eye, staring. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My dad's hunting knife was in my hand inside the bag. Not regulation, but he'd insisted I take it. I kept perfectly still, pretending to sleep, while Ethan hovered in the opening, breathing fast, whispering to himself. "Are you there?" he murmured. "Are you awake?" His words tangled into nonsense, a soft, fevered mutter. Minutes crawled like hours. Finally, he let the fabric fall and drifted away. I lay there with the knife in a white-knuckled grip until the birds started singing. The next day, I trailed the group like a shadow. I catnapped when I could. The leaders got irritated, said I wasn't paying attention. I didn't care. Every time I turned around, Ethan was too close, brushing my neck, trying to smell my hair, reaching for my hands. "Stop," I said, level and cold. He smiled like I'd told a joke. That evening, I caught him digging in my backpack outside my tent. I stepped out, knife tucked in my sleeve. He jumped and slunk away empty-handed. I kept anything personal inside the bag with me while I slept. Halfway through the week, the head leader pulled Ethan aside. Wordless conversation. A ride arrived from town that afternoon. "He's going home," someone said. Most of the scouts waved, confused. The one who'd switched partners with me just crossed his arms and watched. Ethan stood there bewildered, as if he couldn't possibly understand what he'd done wrong. The rest of the trip was quiet. I slept light, knife under my palm. No more footsteps. No more whispers in the dark. Looking back, I'm grateful I trusted my instincts, and grateful my dad told me to pack that knife. I still think about Ethan's smile sometimes. The way he said rope marks. The way he stared through the tent door like he was already imagining something worse. I don't know who he grew up to be. I hope not what I fear. But I learned something I won't forget. When your body screams that something is wrong, listen and put your tent closer to the people who can help. Last summer was the scariest experience of my life. One that I still think about almost every day. I want to share it so maybe someone else learns from it. I was 17 at the time. I had a big group of friends, but there were 5 that I was especially close with. My girlfriend Maya, my buddy Ryan and his girlfriend Jenna, and then Mark and his girlfriend Emily. Together, the 6 of us planned one last big trip before college. We wanted something fun, rebellious, and a little crazy. So we decided to camp in the middle of nowhere for 3 days. All of our parents somehow agreed to let us go. Maybe they trusted us too much, or maybe they just wanted us to get one last adventure out of our systems before we all went our separate ways. We packed food, water, sleeping gear, and everything we need to survive. And of course, being teenagers, we brought along more than enough booze and weed to keep the nights interesting. The spot we chose was a secluded patch of woods a few hours from home. There were houses scattered a mile or so away, but our campsite itself felt cut off from the world. No cell service, just trees, trails, and silence. We parked Mark's SUV close to camp so we could keep an eye on it. 3 tents, one for each couple. The first night was peaceful. We drank, smoked, laughed, and passed out without any issues. The second day, Ryan and Jenna stayed behind while the rest of us hiked. We found a trail that led to an old cemetery tucked into the forest. The graves were weathered and forgotten, but some of them had fresh flowers and little notes. Past the cemetery, we saw signs of tire tracks, like hunters or locals still came through from time to time. It was creepy, but fascinating. We stayed just long enough to spot a deer before heading back to camp. That night, we partied harder than before. It was our last night, so we figured why not. The air was warm, the fire was bright, and everything felt perfect. But sometime after midnight, everything changed. We woke to blood-curdling screams coming from Mark and Emily's tent. The fabric tore with a horrible ripping sound. Someone was slashing it open. Mark shouted, swung his heavy flashlight, and managed to knock whoever it was back long enough to drag Emily to the car. Their tent had been the closest to the vehicle, which gave them the only real chance to escape. The rest of us, me, Maya, Ryan, and Jenna, were trapped. To reach the SUV, we'd have to run right past whoever had attacked their tent. My chest tightened, adrenaline cutting through whatever alcohol had been left in my system. That's when Mark shouted one single word as he started the car. Cemetery. It clicked instantly. The trail beyond the grave connected to a small dirt road. If we could make it there, maybe we could meet Mark's SUV on the other side. I grabbed Maya's hand and yelled for Ryan and Jenna to follow. We ran, stumbling through the dark, my phone flashlight our only guide. I didn't care if the light gave us away. The real danger was getting lost in those woods. The sound of footsteps pounded behind us. Heavy, clumsy, chasing. The cemetery fence appeared just ahead. I vaulted it first, pulling Maya over, then Jenna, then Ryan. We ducked low among the gravestones, hearts hammering in silence. That's when I heard it, the metallic rattle of the fence. He was climbing over. Whoever it was, he moved slowly, deliberate, crunching over the dry ground, getting closer. My body surged into fight or flight mode. I remembered the tiny Swiss Army knife in my pocket. It wasn't much, but it was something. As a shadow loomed near right on top of me, I lashed out and drove the blade into the back of his knee. He screamed, a deep, guttural cry of pain, and collapsed, dropping the weapon he had been carrying. A machete. The sight of it turned my stomach cold. At that exact moment, headlights cut through the trees. Mark's SUV came barreling around the bend. Go, 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 I yelled, shoving Maya forward. We sprinted for the car as the man writhed on the ground, clutching his knee and glaring at us with eyes full of rage. I was the last one in. Even before my door shut, Mark floored it. Gravel sprayed behind us as we tore away into the night. No one spoke. The girls sobbed quietly. My heart felt like it might burst. We drove until we spotted a farmhouse, lights glowing softly inside. We knocked, desperate. An elderly couple answered, shocked by our story, but kind enough to take us in. They gave us food, blankets, and a safe place to sleep. The next morning, the old man grabbed his hunting rifle and led us back to retrieve our gear. Nothing had been stolen, but every single tent had been slashed to ribbons. The woman had called the police while we were gone, and by the time we returned, 2 officers were waiting. We gave our statements. They promised to search, but admitted there wasn't much evidence to go on. We left later that day. The drive home was silent. We barely spoke about it afterwards. College split us apart, and even when we see each other now, it's like none of us want to relive that night. But I do, because I need people to know. If you're going camping, don't go deep into the middle of nowhere. Don't risk being miles from help. It's not worth it. Stay where there are other people, where you can call for police if something goes wrong. Because the world has some truly sick people in it, and we were unlucky enough to meet one of them in the woods. Back in 2011, I was part of a circle of friends who had a tradition. Every spring, we'd pack our gear and head out for a long weekend of camping. Our chosen spot sat on government land, right on the edge of a massive lake. It was beautiful, the kind of place that made you forget about everything else in life. The lake had a dam, so during May the water level was usually low, sometimes low enough that you could walk across the exposed bed. It made the place feel eerie, almost like a hidden world uncovered only once a year. As long as you didn't cause trouble or leave a mess, camping there was allowed. That was always the deal. Privacy wasn't perfect, the campsites were spread apart, but close enough that you could still see other groups through the trees. That year, our group set up on a small hill. Below us, a campsite sat tucked near the shore, and another group had settled above us. The first night passed without issue. A fire, drinks, laughter, the usual. But the second day, things changed. By the afternoon, new campers had arrived at the site below us. At first, we thought nothing of it. We drank, cooked food, and carried on. But by midnight, their party had gotten out of control. The music was thundering, echoing up the hillside, and their voices carried sharp and aggressive in the night. Finally, our friend Chris walked down to ask them to quiet down. He returned a few minutes later with a bloody lip and a black eye. He'd been punched in the face almost immediately. He was pale and shaken, muttering that he was 90% sure those guys were high on something heavy. The mood around our fire shifted instantly. We were all on edge. I went to bed early, not wanting to sit around and stew in tension. A few of my friends stayed up, Chris among them, along with Maya and David, a couple we'd met earlier that day at another site. They had wandered off to visit friends. I remember lying in the tent, half asleep, listening to the distant thump of bass and shouting from below. It felt wrong, like something was building. I don't know how much time had passed when I jolted awake. Screams, sharp, panic screams, tore through the night. I shot upright, heart pounding, and rushed outside. Chaos. People running, yelling, shadows flickering in the firelight. Chris was clutching his chest, stumbling near the flames. Others were shouting to call 911, voices cracking with fear. It was then I learned what had happened. After I'd gone to sleep, the men from the campsite below had decided they weren't done with Chris. On their way up, they had crossed paths with Maya and David returning from their walk. Mistaking David for Chris, both were tall with similar hair. They had smashed glass bottles over both their heads. The two staggered back, dazed and bleeding. A few minutes later, 2 or 3 of the men appeared at our fire out of the darkness, each holding a knife. One a hunting blade, the other a butcher's knife. Chris had stood up to confront them, hands raised, barely able to speak before one of the men lunged forward and stabbed him in the chest. At the same time, Ethan, a camper from the group above us, came running down the hill to help. The man with the butcher's knife turned and drove it into his stomach, dropping him to the ground. The scene erupted into sheer panic. Phones came out, but the signal was non-existent. Someone managed to reach emergency services, but the ambulance was at least half an hour away. Ethan's wound was deep, blood pouring fast. His friends bundled him into the back of a car and sped off to meet the ambulance halfway. Chris was still bleeding, but his wound wasn't quite as severe. We kept him talking, holding cloth against his chest, trying to keep him conscious. The men with the knives bolted back into the trees, their shadows swallowed by the dark. Moments later, we saw the glow of headlights as their Land Rover roared away. My boyfriend and I jumped in his car and drove to the entrance road, hoping to intercept the police. When they arrived, we were told to stay put. A K-9 unit had already been deployed, tracking the men through the forest. Hours dragged by. Finally, word came back. The suspect had tried to flee by driving across the exposed lake bed, but their vehicle had sunk into a muddy stretch, leaving them stranded. They were arrested without incident, heavily intoxicated, strung out on a cocktail of drugs. Both Chris and Ethan survived, though Ethan lost a tremendous amount of blood and spent weeks recovering. David and Maya were left with massive welts on their heads, and one of them may have had a concussion. We were shaken, stunned, traumatized. Later, a few of us had to testify against the attackers in court. It remains one of the scariest things I have ever lived through. What was supposed to be another fun weekend by the lake became a night of blood, chaos, and violence. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the screams echoing in the darkness and see the flash of knives glinting in the firelight.